Hi there. Welcome to this online lecture where I'm just going to talk briefly about the economic order quantity model, or the EOQ. My name's Gareth. I'm a managing director with First Intuition. I do tweet quite regularly, and you can follow me at AAT Top Tutor on Twitter. Also quite happy if you want to drop me an email with any questions. My email address is garethjohn@fi.co.uk. What is the economic order quantity model looking at? Well, if we need supplies of raw materials, we'll need to decide how often we're going to place orders with our suppliers and how much we need to order each time we place an order. For instance, imagine of a particular raw material, I require 1,000 units per annum in order to meet my production requirements so that I can make suitable sales to my customers. Well, if I need 1,000 units per annum, I've got to decide how many units am I ordering each time I contact my supplier. Now, I've got a wide variety of options. I could order 1 unit at a time. Problem is, if I'm only ordering 1 unit at a time, I'm going to have to be phoning my supplier very, very often. In fact, I'd have to phone my supplier 1,000 times during the year, wouldn't I? So I'd be virtually on the phone to them every few hours. Maybe I'd like to order 10 units at a time. Now, if I order 10 units at a time, then I'd have to place 100 orders during the year. Because the assumption here is that regardless of how many units I'm ordering each time I contact my supplier, I need 1,000 units through the whole year. So if I'm ordering 10 at a time, I'd need to phone the supplier 100 times. I could order 100 units at a time, which means that I'd need to be phoning my supplier 10 times during the year. I could even, at the other extreme end, order 1,000 units at a time. That would be the entire year's requirement, so I'd only need to contact my supplier once a year. Now, what the economic order quantity model is helping me to do is to identify, well, how many units should I be ordering each time I contact my supplier? What's the most economical quantity for me to order? And it's basically about reducing the costs in my business, which obviously can help me make more profit. Well, how do we go about calculating the economic order quantity model? Well, there is the equation that we need to use. Now, the equation for calculating the EOQ is the square root of 2 times C times D divided by H. Well, what do these letters stand for? Well, C stands for the cost of ordering the raw materials. So basically the cost every time I phone up my supplier. You can imagine if you phone your supplier, there's going to be a cost associated with the phone call, a cost associated with some paperwork, cost associated with the time of your member of staff that's making the call. And the assumption we make is that the cost for contacting the supplier is the same regardless of how many units you're actually ordering. So C is the cost of placing an order. D is then demand, or the number of units that I require of the raw material. And we've always got to make sure that the demand is shown in annual terms. So how many units do I require each year? And then divided by H. H standing for holding cost. So they should tell you what the cost of holding 1 unit for a year is. And that's what we put in as H. Now, obviously, half the battle in any assessment that you might do is learning and remembering these equations. And there are various little tricks for learning some of the equations that you require. The way I remember the EOQ formula is I think of a square root of a large fish supper. So it's the square root of a large fish supper. So just make sure that you're going to do the square root. And because it's a large fish supper, I'm going to want 2 cod with my fish supper. So it's 2 cod over chips. And that helps me to remember that it's 2 times C. And the fact that it's cod, the CO, actually even then reminds me that it's the cost of placing an order, times D, that demand for the raw material for each year. And then the chips helps me remember the H for the holding cost. So the square root of a large fish supper, the square root of 2 cod over chips, or the square root of 2 times C times D over H. And that's the way I've always remembered the EOQ formula? Well, it's one thing to remember the formula, it's another thing to then put some figures into it. So I've just made up a nice little example here with the key bits of information that we might be given in the assessment. A company needs 5,000 units of raw material each year. Ordering costs at £8 for each order placed. Holding costs are £3.50 per unit per annum. Now, these are the three key bits of information you'll typically be given in a task in the assessment. Your job will then to be working out the economic order quantity. They need 5,000 units each year, but how many units are they going to order each time they contact the supplier? So why don't you pause me for a couple of minutes, and perhaps without referring to any notes you've got, see if you can remember the formula. Hopefully you'll remember the way to remember the formula, and see if you can put the numbers into the formula and get it through your calculator. So pause me for a couple of minutes. Well, to work out the EOQ, we've got our formula, and the way to remember is the square root of a large fish supper. So the square root of 2 cod over chips, so 2 times C times D over H. Well, what are the numbers I need to plug into this? Well, let's go back to the figures in the example I created. So the 5,000 units that we require, well, that's D. That's the annual demand. Remember, it should be annual, and they have told us that it's each year. So the 5,000 is D. Ordering costs at £8 for each order placed. That's C, the cost of placing an order. Remember, the assumption is that every time I phone my supplier, the cost is £8, regardless of how many units I'm actually ordering. And then holding costs are £3.50, so that's my H, the holding cost. So I've got my three bits of information that I require. So let's plug it into the EOQ formula. So square root of 2 times C. C is the cost of ordering, the £8, times D, the annual demand for the raw material, so 5,000, over H, the holding cost of holding 1 unit for 1 year, which we're given as £3.50. Now, I would just suggest you're a little bit slow and careful with how you do the calculation. So, in fact, I'm going to start by just working out what's at the top of the equation. So 2 times 8 times 5,000, that comes to 80,000 at the top. If I then work out what 80,000 divided by £3.50 comes to, I get 22,857.1 or something. And then if I take the square root of that figure, I get that coming to 151. And I get it coming to 151.2. Now, do make sure you're reading any rules in the task about rounding. Normally, you'd probably just do this to the nearest whole kilogram or the nearest whole unit. So I'm going to put it to 151 units. That's how many units I want to order each time I phone up my supplier in order to effectively minimise the costs associated with our stock policy and therefore increase the profits of the business. Well, I'm hoping you found that useful, and hopefully you'll feel a bit more confident tackling the EOQ task in the assessment now. As I said, more than happy if you want to get in touch with me. So feel free to follow me on Twitter at AATTopTutor, or email me at garethjohn@fi.co.uk. So my name's Gareth, and I'm a Managing Director with First Intuition. Thanks for your attention.